Hello, everyone. Today we have amazing Lauren. Lauren is a former Meta employee, and Lauren is a content strategist. So we are going to learn about the profession of a content strategist, and also in the first part, and then the second part we'll dedicate to the interview portion of the content strategist. Hi, Lauren.
Hi.
Can you please briefly introduce yourself? Tell us what you do.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Lauren. I spent a few years as a high school and middle school English teacher before pivoting into content strategy, which is how I sort of landed my role at Meta. Went into Meta as first a program coordinator, but then very quickly sort of transformed into the content strategy person slash copywriter for my team. So I'm still relatively new to content strategy and copywriting. However, my background as an English teacher has definitely helped in sort of giving me the skills that I need to hopefully successfully do content strategy.
um, so I am not from the content strategy or from marketing world, but I would love to learn about the content strategy as a whole. So what is content strategy?
Yeah, so to me, content strategy is basically when you make a comprehensive plan for creating, publishing, and then managing content, whether it's for a brand, a program, an organization. And the purpose of content strategy is to basically achieve specific business and program goals while still being a ladder of support to the audience that you serve. That's something that's really important to me. Just fundamentally, I think that when you're working in corporate settings, definitely support the company that you serve, but there's also the audience there in front of you. And so to be an offer of support for the audience is especially important in content strategy.
Mm-hmm. And if, for example, I decide to become a content strategist, what skills should I have to become one?
You should definitely have the strategic thinking in mind. So again, like I said, with content strategy, you're having to support two things. You're having to support your company and you're having to support the people in front of you. So you need a little bit of creativity, but also a lot of strategy in how can I help achieve the goals of the business, but still help the people and the challenges that they might have or the information that they might need. So you'll definitely need a lot of strategic thinking. You'll need a lot of communication and collaboration. When you are in content strategy, you're not just copywriting, you're not just curating content, you're also sometimes, for me specifically, having to work with product teams, having to work with user research teams, design teams, marketing teams. You have to be very open to collaboration. It's not something that you can sort of do independently because it's just a lot of work that goes into content strategy and there are a lot of moving pieces. So communication is a big skill you're going to need to have, understanding how to work cross-functionally and ask the questions that need to be asked, but also communicating what you know as well. And then lastly, creativity. If you do find yourself in a content strategy role like I was in, where I was doing a lot of the copywriting, you'll find yourself spending a lot of time writing content. So you do need to have a little bit of creativity when it comes to just, having snappy, witty writing.
Mm-hmm. And how do you get that content? Do you get that from the product teams or do you get that from the media?
It's a mixture of both. When I worked at Meta, I leveraged a lot of internal resources. So working with the product marketing team and seeing what collateral they already had that I could just repurpose and rephrase and reframe for the audience that I was serving. So I would look at a lot of our internal sites. I would also look at a lot of our external facing sites. For instance, Meta has like a business site, they have a creator site, they have their Instagram site. I would go there for information and see what's the messaging and the positioning of certain products and programs, and just capture the essence of those pieces and then repurpose it for whatever content that I was creating. Secondly, you can do a lot of just your own personal research. So it's really important as a content strategist that you stay up to date on trends. and just understand how your audience might be growing and changing with each day or each week. So just research whatever you can with like a simple Google search. I was working with creators for one of the major programs at Meta. So I was literally just Googling like what's going on in the creator economy, what are their pain points, what are they interested in learning about when it comes to using Instagram or Facebook for their creator work. And then also just scrolling on Instagram and Facebook to see like what's going on, what's trending, and how does this audience like to be talked to and catered to.
Mm-hmm. And what is the goal of a content strategy? Is that to gain more views? Is that to gain more participants, or like grow audience? What is the ultimate goal of a content strategy? What's the KPI that all of you require?
Yeah, great question. I think it'll definitely vary depending on like the company that you're working for. So for example, sometimes the goal of the content strategy is like conversions or actions. You want the audience to learn about a product and then use it. That's oftentimes what I find the case. With the creators community, we wanted creators to create more content. So the goal was to teach them about the different programs and different products that we offer, teach them what they are, how to use it, why they should use it, and then get them to use it. So that's oftentimes the ultimate goal, sort of the blanket goal of a content strategy is like audience engagement and then getting them to endorse or use the product themselves.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And for example, if you were tasked to create a content strategy for a certain product to deliver to your audience, what would be your step-by-step process? Like first, I'll do this, and then second, this. Can you describe?
Yeah, first I would learn the product. So a lot of content strategy is like I said, it's researching. So I spent like hours on end reading about product features and product launches because I'm tasked with delivering content about a product. I need to know the ins and outs of it myself. So it's a lot of research. It's a lot of talking to product teams and product marketing teams to understand the functionality of the thing we're trying to market. And then also talking to product marketing to say like, hey, how should I be talking about the product? What is the messaging and the positioning? So that's the first step. Second step would be learning the audience. When you're a content strategist, you're definitely working with very diverse audiences. So you need to know what are their interests, what's the demographic, where in the user or consumer journey are they? Because if they are not in the beginner stages, you shouldn't speak to them or market to them as if they're beginners because they might find that condescending or patronizing. If they're not quite experts and they fall in the middle, then that informs your content strategy where you're like, okay, they understand a little bit about this product, but they're not experts at it yet. So I can skip over the introductions and just start in the middle with them. So second most important thing is like really understand your audience and maintain a relationship with them. Oftentimes, people aren't going to consume content unless they feel some sort of connection to the person who's presenting it to them. So that goes hand in hand with like really understanding them. It's like as you build your relationship with them, you start to learn about them. Then once you have those two things, I think you can really start marrying the process of like, okay, I know the product, I know the audience, now I can start writing. And the writing process, it kind of just is something that you develop. You develop the writing skills the more you write and the more that you read.
That's an amazing answer. That's just so clear to me. Thank you so much for answering. And I understand that sometimes the process or the work that content strategists do have its challenges. So what other challenges can you mention or you have struggled with?
Um, Sometimes it's a challenge learning about products, especially if they're very convoluted and very complex. So I think the bulk of my time, especially at Meta, was just like learning the product. That was the most challenging part. And also, sometimes it can be difficult knowing like who should I be going to learn about product functionality. That can be the most challenging part, I think. especially if you're supporting a program or an audience where there's multiple products they could be leveraging to meet their goals, then you find yourself having to learn about like 15 at one time. And then you're having to write about 15 products that do different things. And that sort of bleeds into like the second challenge, which is like maintaining that creative juice and that creative flow. There were times where like by the end of the week, my brain just felt really mushy because I had spent so much time just writing and coming up with like funny quips and Gen Z slang and like things like that. So I think the second most challenging part is just remaining creative and trying not to burn out. And because at that point, if you're burnt out, then it really, really stops the creative process.
And when you create your content, or when you create the content strategy and the content, what tools do you normally use?
Definitely content calendars. I think content calendars were really big. I didn't leverage anything like Asana or any type of specific technical tool. I would just create calendars using Google Sheets because that way I could just like very easily go in, edit, and move things around. I can color code. I can strike through the things that are already completed. Content calendar is going to be like the baby because you're going to constantly go into it and change it and update it. I think when I was working at Meta, I was looking at the content calendar pretty much every single day. And I had multiple calendars as well. I had a calendar that told me when the launch dates were for specific pieces of content, but I also had a working calendar that helped me keep track of when it was time to submit something for communications and legal review, when it was time to submit something for design review, when am I going to get design review assets back for revision? So I think the number one tool is a content calendar because if not, it's very easy for pieces of content to get lost in the shuffle, whether it's getting lost in the production stages or just getting lost in the launching stages.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the comms and the designers. So, what would you say? What are the teams, XFN teams, that you work closely with on a like
Mhm.
day-to-day basis? Someone, the teams that you constantly in a communication.
Yeah, definitely. For Meta, it was definitely always the program management team because they were the ones who executed a lot of the work and delivered a lot of the content. You're constantly working with product teams because you need to know what products am I supposed to write about. You're working with marketing because you need to know what are the style guidelines and the brand guidelines and the tone that you need to work with. You're working with comms to make sure you're not saying anything that shouldn't be said. You're working with legal to make sure, again, you're not saying anything that shouldn't be said. And you're working with a design team, whether that's in-house or external, like with a vendor. With Meta, I worked with both. For one program, we were doing designs that were created by Meta. So that was just another person on a different team, like another program manager. But for a separate program, I was working with a vendor and they were basically hired to create the designs and the digital assets for us. So a lot of XFN teams that you're constantly working with, which is why, again, like communication is key, collaboration is key, and so is that content calendar.
Are the deadlines important in a content strategy?
I would say so, especially if you're trying to deliver content that aligns with like a product's go to market. Because if the product team is really trying to push a product by a certain time and they have their goals, then the content team should be lining up with them as well. So I think deadlines are especially important. Yeah, just because when you're delivering content, sometimes your audience is expecting it to come at a certain time as well.
Mhm. And when you work with so many XFN teams, I know that there may be delays. How do you deal with the delays coming from the other teams?
For me personally, the way my brain works is I like to have a lot of contingency plans in place. That's just the way that I operate. So, of course, when it comes to working with a lot of XFN, like you mentioned, there's going to sometimes be bumps in the road and some hiccups. So I will sometimes plan like backup content if a post isn't ready to go at a certain time because we're missing an asset or I don't know, something with a particular product isn't ready yet, then I will try my best to just swap it out with a different piece of content. Let's say we wanted something to go out on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, but on Monday, that specific piece of content isn't ready to go out yet. Let me see if I can just swap it out with Wednesday's piece instead. And if not, what's like a filler that I can do? Luckily with Meta, we were so big on community engagement that if a piece of content that I was writing wasn't ready to go, then I could speak to like a community manager and say like, hey, can we do an engagement piece instead, where instead of teaching the audience about products, can we just get them to connect with each other by asking a question to the group?
Mhm. That's great. And when you mentioned engagement piece, like what are the what other pieces of content you usually rely on? Like I know that there is a product content, there's an engagement product, is engagement content. Is there anything else?
That's a great question. Let me think about that. Oftentimes for me, it was a lot of like product education, engagement, and community. For one program in particular, when it was product specific, I wrote up a lot of like tactile how-to content. So sometimes it's like taking a step back and actually teaching, like, this is how you set up this product. So it's kind of like help center-esque type of content. I feel like those are like the three big ones, to be honest. Yeah.
Do you turn to media to like educate people about the trends and the news of like what's going on in the world?
Yeah, I never got to do that myself, although before my time at Meta ended, that was like a huge piece of discussion is like trend reports. And that was something that I would work with the community managers with. I never specifically got to write trend reports, but I do know that that was like a key component for at least some of the audiences that we were serving. Again, this sort of ladders back to really knowing what your audience wants. And when I worked with the creator audience, that was very relevant to them. So I would work with the program manager and the community manager, and we would talk about like, how can we come up with a trends report and have that be a part of our content strategy, where maybe every Friday we do like a weekly recap of all the things that took place in pop culture.
Can you describe your day to day of a content strategy?
Yeah, my day to day, it was basically just creating content, reviewing content, and editing content. So it looked very different day to day depending on what stage of the content production I was at. But sometimes it basically entailed doing a little bit of research and analyzing audience behavior. So that could be as simple as like going into the group that I serve and seeing what are they talking about? What questions do they have? What complaints do they have? What are they excited about? What are the good things they have to say and the bad things they have to say? Because you got to take the good with the bad, even if it hurts a little bit. But that's really how you understand what kind of content you need to create, because you want to make things that are relevant to the audience. So starts off with doing a little bit of research. It could be very minimal, or it could be very data heavy if you want to go into that. And then it goes into writing up the content. If I see that the audience has questions on how does this chat feature work and why should I use it, then I will write content that first explains how to use it, and then I'll write content that explains why you should use it. That will then get sent off to the appropriate XFN teams for review. I will get their feedback back and make the appropriate changes if necessary. I'll work with the design teams to make sure like, hey, this is the messaging and the copy that's been approved. Can we make a digital asset that will supplement this piece of writing? And then I'll package all of it up. I will link it to the content calendars. I'll speak to the community manager, the program manager, to let them know like, hey, the content is packaged and ready to go. Here's the date that it should go out. Here's the caption that it should go with. Here's the asset that should be attached to it. And then sort of rinse, wash, repeat, do the same thing every single day.
That was really interesting. I got so much understanding about the role of a content strategist. I think for me personally, it's a very difficult role because it implies with a lot of writing, and I hate writing.
That's fair. I don't always like it either.
For me to write a report or write a piece of an article is like, I don't know, giving a birth to something. So
I
hard.
think for me, it was handy that, like, again, I came from an English background. I was an English major, I was an English teacher. So, storytelling is a part of the craft that I came into this role with. I was teaching middle schoolers and high schoolers how to do this. I should be able to do it myself. And being in this role definitely pushed me. I never saw myself being a copywriter. I never saw myself being a writer. But as I was digging more and more into this role, I realized, like, oh, this is something that I can do. Do I always like it? No. Like I said, by the end of the week, sometimes my brain is just mushy, and I would sometimes have dreams at night about the stuff that I was writing. And that's when I knew, like, maybe it was time to take a pause so that I don't get burnt out. But at least in my content strategy role, copywriting was a big part of it. I think that in some roles, you might find yourself being more of a content manager and having a higher level overview of how the content is created and distributed. But for me, I was just in a situation where I was sort of in the weeds of things and also in the execution of things.
Mhm. Thank you so much, Lauren, for this amazing interview. We also have the second part, so stay
Mhm.
tuned and um, see you later.